In this video, we will talk about truth. Now, there's a lot to say about truth, and I'm going to focus on only one distinction, that between realism and anti-realism about truth. Now, when somebody says that they're an anti-realist about truth, I can imagine that they would quickly get a lot of critical questions or even accusations. Things like, oh, so you don't really believe in truth, right? You think truth is just as good as falsehood. You're the kind of philosopher who has generated this world full of fake news and liars and so on and so forth. And that would be completely wrong. Anti-realism about truth has nothing to do with a disrespect for truth or with the idea that truth isn't important or anything like that. And I believe that there are quite a number of philosophers who are anti-realists about truth and who have been misunderstood, mostly by non-philosophers, but sometimes by other philosophers, as somehow being dismissive of truth. So one of the things that I would like to do in this video, and I think probably the video is a success if this is the take-home lesson, is that anti-realism about truth is not a sort of scary anti-truth philosophical position. Okay, so what is realism and what is anti-realism about truth? Well, frankly, I think the easiest way to approach this topic is by thinking first about mathematics. And we are going to ask what realism and anti-realism about truth is in the realm of mathematics, and then we will move onwards to truths about the world around us. Okay, so let's start with mathematics. So clearly there are certain things in mathematics that we have proven to be true. So, for instance, we know that 1 plus 1 is 2, and a little more interestingly, we know that there are infinitely many prime numbers, and we know many other things as well. But there are also things that we don't know. So, for instance, there is something called the twin prime conjecture. Now, sometimes prime numbers come in pairs, you could say. Right? They're only two numbers apart. So, for instance, 3 and 5 are a prime pair, and 5 and 7 are a prime pair, and 11 and 13 are a prime pair. Now, the twin prime conjecture conjectures that there are infinitely many prime pairs, right? That there are always more prime pairs, no matter how far you go along the numbers. Okay, so we don't know whether the twin prime conjecture is true or false. We have no proof that it's true, and we have no proof that it's false. Okay? So we can imagine that there are three scenarios here. One scenario is that it is possible to prove that the twin prime conjecture is true. Right? We haven't done so yet. We haven't found the proof yet. But let's assume for a moment that it's possible to prove it. Okay. So, in that case, if it's possible to prove that the twin prime conjecture is true, then the twin prime conjecture is true. That is what the realist will say, and that is what the anti-realist will say. If we can prove it to be true, it's true. Second option. Maybe we can prove that the twin prime conjecture is false. Well, if that's the case, then both the realist and the anti-realist will say, yeah, if it's possible to prove that the twin prime conjecture is false, then it's false. And I'd like to stress exactly what it is that I'm saying in these two cases, right? I'm not saying once we have proven that the twin prime conjecture is true, it is true, or once we have proven that the twin prime conjecture is false, it is false. No, what I'm saying is that if it's possible to prove that the twin prime conjecture is true, then it's true. And if it's possible to prove that the twin prime conjecture is false, then it's false. Right? Even if we don't possess the proof yet, the mere possibility of the proof, the mere existence, even if we haven't found it yet, of the proof, well, that's enough. Right? That guarantees the truth or falsity of the conjecture. Okay, but there's a third possibility. And the third possibility is that it is impossible to either prove or disprove the twin prime conjecture. It is a well-known feature of mathematics that not all mathematical claims are provable or disprovable. Certain claims are neither. There are in fact claims about which we know that they are neither provable nor disprovable. About the twin prime conjecture, we don't even know that. But it's possible, right? It's possible that there are no proofs that it's true and there are no proofs that it's false. Now that is where the realist and the anti-realist are going to have different ideas. This is what the realist is going to say. The realist is going to say, look, in our mathematical proofs, what we get into view is a pre-existing independent realm of mathematical entities, right? It's there. The mathematical facts are there, independent, you could say, of our practices of proving. And so either there are or there are not infinitely many prime twins, right? If there are infinitely many prime twins, then the twin prime conjecture is true. And if there are not infinitely many prime twins, then the twin prime conjecture is false. It has to be either true or false. And if we can't prove it one way or the other, then that just means that we can't prove it, but it's still going to be either true or false. Okay, so that's what the realist says. Now the anti-realist about truth in mathematics is going to say something else. The anti-realist is going to say, look, mathematical truth just is provability. If you can prove something, then it's true. If you can't prove it, if you can prove that it's not true, if you can prove the opposite, then it's false. But if you can prove neither, if you can't prove the twin prime conjecture and you can't disprove the twin prime conjecture, then there is no fact there. Then it's neither true nor false. Okay. So the realist says of any mathematical statement that it's got to be either true or false, independently of whether we can prove it. The anti-realist says, no, look, if our methods of proving can't make a decision about any of these mathematical claims, then it just doesn't fall under the concept of truth, right? It's not truth, it's not false, it's not true, it's not false, it's neither. And so the distinction between the realist and the anti-realist here is that the realist believes that there is an independent realm of mathematical facts that our methods of investigation, right, our methods of proof are trying to get access to. Whereas the anti-realist says, no, that's not the case. There's just our methods of proof, and those define what mathematical truth is and what mathematical falsehood is. And anything that doesn't fall under our methods of proof is therefore neither true nor false. Well, which of these two positions is better? Well, I'm not going to try to decide that, but I want to point out that there's at least one problem that the realist faces that the anti-realist doesn't. And that's that the realist has to explain how we get into contact with this realm of mathematical facts and how we know that our methods of proof are adequate to it. Right? How do we know that our methods of proof are the right way of investigating this independently existing mathematical realm? That's a question that the anti-realist doesn't face. For the anti-realist, mathematical truth is defined in terms of our methods of proof. And so there's no question about adequacy. All right, that's realism and anti-realism when it comes to mathematics. So what about realism and anti-realism when it comes to the world around us? Now, obviously, we do not investigate the world around us through the method of mathematical proof. Rather, we use a very complicated set of methods involving empirical investigation, like we look at things, involving theorizing, building instruments, and so on and so forth. I mean, it's really extremely complicated what we do to investigate the natural world. And in fact, we are sometimes changing and improving our methods of investigation. Okay, so the realist and the anti-realist about truth in general, or truth about the world, you know, the kinds of things where empirical investigation plays a role, don't disagree about the fact that we need to search for truths. They don't disagree about that. They both think that we need to search for truths. They don't disagree about how to do it, because both of them think that we need to use our best empirical methods and even that we need to continue improving our empirical methods. That's what we need to do when we try to get at the truth. But they do disagree about the relation between, on the one hand, these empirical methods, and on the other hand, the world. So here's one way to get that into view. Suppose that somebody makes the claim that if we follow the best empirical methods that we have, we will discover reality. Right? If we follow the best empirical methods that we have, or maybe even the best empirical methods that we can come up with, right? We keep improving them. So if we use the best empirical methods that we can come up with, then we will discover reality. Right? That's something that the realist and the anti-realist probably both want to say. But there is a philosophical disagreement about which half of this story, so to speak, is more fundamental. So this is what the realist says. The realist says, well, the fundamental thing here is reality. And a good empirical method is a method that gets us into touch with reality. So yes, good empirical methods bring us into touch with reality. That's what a good empirical method is, right? It's something that actually brings us in touch with this independently existing reality. The anti-realist would say this. They would say, yes, good empirical methods bring us into contact with reality because that's what reality is. Right? That's not that's what good empirical methods are. That's what reality is. Right? The fundamental notion here, the fundamental notion is the idea of investigation, of a good empirical method, of an epistemic standard. And reality, well, that can be defined as that which gets uncovered when we use the best empirical methods that we have. Okay, so again, the realist is somebody who says, well, reality is the fundamental notion here, and a good method is one that brings us in touch with reality. And the anti-realist says, oh, our methods, our epistemic norms are the fundamental notion here, and reality is what we come up with, or what we find when we use those methods and norms. So there's a distinction in what is more fundamental. Is reality fundamental and our norms have to live up to that? Or our norms are fundamental and reality is what gets discovered when we follow through on those norms? Like when we perfectly follow through on the best version of the norms that we could possibly come up with. That's probably the best way to think about that. So this is not a distinction between somebody who wants to search for the truth and somebody who doesn't. Right? Both of these persons want to use our best empirical methods to find out about reality. It's also, therefore, not a discussion about what the best empirical methods are. It is a discussion about, at a very fundamental level, really, a very deep philosophical level, about what is more fundamental. Is it our norms or is it reality? Right? Is reality the authority that determines whether our norms are any good? Or are we the authority who determines whether our norms are any good, and reality is what comes out of that? Those are the two pictures that we have here. The realist and the anti-realist picture. So in mathematics, we had a nice test case when we thought about these unprovable truths, like maybe, we don't know whether it's an unprovable truth, but maybe the twin prime conjecture. Right? Suppose that it's unprovable. You can't prove it, can't disprove it. Is it still true or false? Right? And the realist said yes, and the anti-realist said no, it's neither true nor false. I think we can come up with, vaguely plausible scenarios like that in the empirical realm as well. Right? Suppose that somebody says, oh, maybe there's a type of particle, let's call it a do-nothing-on, a do-nothing-on, a do-nothing-on. Do-nothing-ons are tiny particles, they fly through space, and they do nothing, right? They don't interact with any other particles, right? And that means that by definition, they are completely undetectable. Okay, so are there any do-nothing-ons? Well, obviously, we don't have any evidence for do-nothing-ons because they don't interact with any other particles. So we don't know, right? You could say we don't know. At least we don't have any evidence for them. Well, if I'm a realist, then I would probably say, well, either they're there or they're not there, but we'll never be able to know, right? I mean, either there are do-nothing-ons or there are not do-nothing-ons. Reality is independent of what we can find out about it. Alas, unfortunately for us maybe, we can't find out whether there are any do-nothing-ons, because they do nothing. But it's either true or false that there are do-nothing-ons. The anti-realist, on the other hand, is going to say, no, it's not going to be either true or false. Right? I mean, if do-nothing-ons are by definition beyond even our best empirical methods, then there's no truth or falsity about them. Right? There's no sense in which their existence or non-existence can be part of reality. They're just outside of the scope of what it means to discuss what is real. So again, we see that the realist is going to say that something has to be either true or false, whereas the anti-realist is going to dismiss certain ideas as being neither true nor false. So, to pick up a thread that I threw out and then didn't really follow a couple of minutes ago, one other way to think about realism versus anti-realism is to think about it in terms of authority. So where does the authority for our claims come from? Well, everybody in a sense is going to agree that the authority for our claims comes from our norms, from our methods of investigation. Right? If I want to tell you this and this and this is true about the world, I've got to show you how I came to that result. I've got to show you my method. So that's where the authority comes from. But where do those epistemic norms get their authority? Right? This is where the realist is going to say, well, the world, right? The world is going to give its authority to certain epistemic methods, namely in the following way: only those epistemic methods which are good at uncovering reality have authority. Only they are good, right? Only they can count as generating knowledge. It's possible for the realist to say this because they believe that reality is more fundamental than the norms. In fact, it's necessary for the realist to say this because they think that reality is the fundamental thing and the norms are trying to latch onto that. On the other hand, if I'm an anti-realist, then our methods and norms are going to be the primary thing, and reality is just what comes out of that, right? What we discover when we follow through on those norms. And so if I'm an anti-realist, I need another story about authority. And really the only plausible story there is that the normativity of our methods comes from us, right? It comes from our communities. It comes from our thinking. Maybe it comes from something like the basic structure of the human mind, or even the basic structure of finite thought in general. I mean, that would be a very Kantian story. Or maybe it comes from more historically generated situations in society, in our culture, in science. Who knows? That would be, a different type of story, a more contextual story maybe. But some kind of story that takes us as the primary locus of authority and not independent reality as the primary locus of authority is what is needed. So some people might want to object that we can't be the source of authority for our claims. Reality has to be the source of authority for our complaints. And those are people who would be attracted to realism. But of course the anti-realist can have, can try to assuage that worry, but can also formulate a worry for the realist. And the worry for the realist is that it might seem that realism is going to lead to skepticism. Right? If reality is independent of our norms, how do we know that our norms are actually adequate to reality? How do we know that our ways of investigating, that what comes out of that is reality and not something that has nothing to do with reality? And it's not so easy to see how to solve that, right? So it's not so easy to see how realism can avoid a skepticism that suggests that there might be an unbridgeable gap between, on the one hand, reality and on the other hand, our norms. And so we can see that a discussion about realism and anti-realism can also be a discussion about skepticism. It can be a discussion about maybe certain types of idealism or contextualism, and so on and so forth. So, at any rate, I hope that it's become clear that to be an anti-realist about truth is not to embrace fake news or dismiss the search for truth or something like that. It's also not to say that what we believe is correct or that our methods are perfect. No, the anti-realist almost always is going to say that, the methods they're talking about are like the best possible version of our methods, used in the best possible way, which we probably are not doing, right now. And certainly which not everyone is doing, right? So an anti-realist doesn't have to agree with everyone or something like that. No, they have exactly the same normative claims about good and bad methods of investigation as the realist. So realism and anti-realism about truth, very important philosophically. If we want to understand our relation to reality, this is a crucial issue. But not some scary topic that has to do with the denial of truth.